Michael Jordan and Larry Bird had spent the better part of a decade trying to solve each other, and it all came down to one possession, tied game, clock bleeding out under 10 seconds, in a building that had never once been kind to Chicago when Boston needed a stop. What Chicago's coaching staff decided to do about it looked, on paper, like the smartest call anybody in that arena had ever seen. Put the two best perimeter defenders in basketball on one man, at the same time, in the same possession, with the entire game sitting on it. Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, two future Hall of Famers, both locked onto a single 33-year-old forward who, 12 months earlier, wasn't sure his own feet would ever let him play an NBA minute again. That's not a defensive wrinkle. That's a wall built out of two of the greatest defenders the sport has ever produced, and somebody still had to walk straight through the middle of it. 3 nights before that possession, in a kitchen a long way from Chicago Stadium, the phone rang. It was late, past 11, the kind of hour where a phone ringing means something. On the other end was an old teammate, a guy who'd known Larry Bird since before either of them had a dollar to their name, the kind of friend who still called him Larry Legend as a joke and meant it as anything but. "You see the paper today?" the voice said. "They're saying Jordan and Pippen both. Both of them, Larry, on you." Whole possession. There was a long pause on Bird's end, the kind of silence that used to make teammates nervous back when he was healthy, because it usually meant he was already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. "How do they rotate?" Bird finally said. "Not a question about the double team itself, a question about the seams inside it. That's what you're asking? 2 guys, Larry, some of the best hands in the league, and you want to know rotations?" "Everybody's going to ask if I can still shoot over 2 guys, Bird said. "Nobody's asking if 2 guys can cover the same 8 feet of floor for a full possession without a mistake. That's the only question that matters." His friend didn't say anything for a second. He knew that tone. It was the tone of a man who had already worked the problem out in his head hours ago and was just waiting for his legs to catch up to the math his brain had already finished. "Your back's not right," the friend said quietly. "Your feet aren't all the way back either." "Everybody knows that." "I know my own feet," Bird said. "I'm asking about theirs." He hung up not long after that. He didn't sound worried. Men who've already solved something rarely do. "Now, before this goes any further, put yourself in that kitchen for a second. Somebody tells you the other team is putting not 1 but 2 of the best defenders alive directly on you, in a building that's given your team nothing but losses for the better part of a decade, and you're coming off a season that ended after 6 games because your own feet gave out under you. Are you sleeping easy that night? Are you already drawing rotations on a napkin at midnight, or are you looking for somebody else to take that shot? Tell me honestly in the comments, because the man on the other end of that call didn't hesitate for even a second, and it still didn't make sense to anybody who wasn't inside his head. To understand why Chicago felt like it needed 2 grown men to guard one, you have to rewind even further than that phone call. Back to a warm-up gym in Indianapolis in the summer of 1984, long before either of them had suited up against each other in a game that counted. Jordan was a college kid a few months out from the NBA draft, part of the US Olympic team scrimmaging against a lineup of NBA All-Stars brought in to toughen the amateurs up before the games. During warm-ups, a loose ball rolled off the Olympic half of the floor into the pros' territory. Jordan jogged over the way anybody would to grab a stray ball. Bird got there first. He picked it up, looked the 21-year-old dead in the eye, and kicked it clean back over Jordan's head to the other end of the court without a single word. No handoff, no nod, nothing. Just a small, deliberate reminder from the league's reigning MVP that a college kid hadn't earned the right to anything yet, least of all a basketball handed to him politely. Jordan would say years later that the message landed exactly the way it was meant to. This is business now, and you are beneath it. And that he carried that exact feeling with him into every single one of the 60-some games he'd eventually play against Bird's Celtics. That night, running on nothing but the sting of it, Jordan and the Olympic roster went out and beat the NBA All-Stars on the floor outright, something nobody in that gym expected walking in. What followed over the next 2 seasons was a pair of playoff sweeps that Jordan still hasn't fully lived down, even decades later. In 1986, in just his second year in the league, coming back from a broken foot that had wiped out most of that season, Jordan dropped 49 points on Boston in Game 1 and still lost by 19. 3 days later, in Game 2, he did something the league had never seen before and hasn't seen matched since. 63 points, still the highest total ever scored in a single NBA playoff game, every single shot contested by a defense that had 5 future Hall of Famers on the floor at once. Boston still won in double overtime. Boston still swept the series 3-0 2 days after that. Bird's own reaction afterward, live on camera, became one of the most repeated lines in the sport's history. "I think he's God disguised as Michael Jordan." Today, in this building, he put on one of the greatest shows I've ever seen, and I still don't believe it happened. It's the kind of sentence that sounds like total surrender, except Boston still walked away with the win and the series both, and Jordan's own mood afterward made the gap painfully clear. 50 points, 49-63, he told reporters, jaw tight. "None of it means a single thing to me if we don't win." The very next year, 1987, the same two teams ran into each other in the same round, and the result barely moved an inch. Another sweep. Jordan averaged an outrageous number across those 3 games for a team that lost every single one of them, and in the deciding contest, with half of Boston's frontcourt banged up and barely able to move, Jordan still put up 30, trying to drag Chicago back into the series. Bird answered with 31, 14 of them arriving in the fourth quarter alone, on a night where the Celtics needed almost nothing else from anybody else on the roster. Final score in Chicago Stadium, Boston by 11, series over, same result as the year before. 2 playoff meetings, 2 sweeps, and 1 pattern already carved permanently into both men's records. Jordan could outduel. Bird individually on any given night, could set records doing it, could leave reporters writing headlines about him for a week afterward, and still walk out of the building with absolutely nothing to show for it. Pat Riley, who coached against both of them at the peak of their powers, was once asked point-blank which one he'd pick to take a shot to save a basketball game. "Michael Jordan," he said instantly, no hesitation at all. Then he was asked which one he'd pick to take a shot to save his own life. "I'd take Larry Bird," Riley said, just as fast, just as certain. 2 completely different answers, 2 completely different kinds of trust, and in Riley's mind, both of them were exactly, unshakably correct. By the time this particular night in Chicago Stadium rolled around, none of that history had gone anywhere, and the man Chicago was building an entire defensive game plan around wasn't the same player who had swept Jordan those 2 years running. The season before, he played exactly 6 games before his own body simply stopped cooperating, bone spurs buried deep in both heels, bad enough that surgeons had to go into each foot separately to dig them out. The recovery afterward was slow, painful, and genuinely uncertain the entire way through. By his own account, when training camp opened again that fall, his feet still hadn't loosened up, and there were entire mornings that preseason where he privately wondered if this comeback was ever going to happen at all. Then, somewhere in the middle of the exhibition schedule, almost without any warning, something in his legs simply clicked back into place, like a switch flipping somewhere nobody could see from the outside. He didn't just return to the lineup. He came back playing well enough that the league handed him its Comeback Player of the Year award that same season, a 33-year-old forward proving in real time, in front of everybody who'd already written him off, that the surgeries hadn't actually finished him. Chicago Stadium that night was doing exactly what it always did whenever these two teams met, completely full, loud enough that both coaching staffs admitted afterward they couldn't hear their own play calls over the noise. Decades of sneaker rubber and old varnish baked permanently into the rafters above center court. This had never been a friendly building for Chicago in this particular rivalry either. The Bulls had dropped an entire stretch of 17 straight games to Boston through the mid to late 80s, an era where they simply could not find a way to leave any arena, home or road, with a win against the Celtics in a game that actually mattered on the standings. Both benches carried that weight, walking onto the floor. Both crowds knew it, whether they said it out loud or just felt it sitting there in the air. The game itself had gone back and forth for 4 full quarters, neither side able to build the kind of cushion that lets a building relax, every single possession in the fourth quarter carrying the weight of 2. Then, with the score tied and the clock ticking under 10 seconds, Chicago's defense finally sprung the trap it had clearly been building toward the entire second half. Jordan picked Bird up on the switch, matching him stride for stride like a shadow that had learned to walk on its own. The instant the ball touched Bird's hands, Pippen came flying over from the weak side to help, fully committing his entire body to the coverage. This wasn't a scramble, it wasn't a miscommunication or a panicked last-second rotation. It was 2 of the most decorated perimeter defenders the sport has ever produced, standing shoulder to shoulder between one man and the rim, on purpose, in the wide-open floor, because absolutely everybody in that building, both benches, every assistant coach, every fan holding a ticket stub, already knew with total certainty exactly where this possession was headed. There was no other read left to make. The ball was always going to Bird, and Chicago knew it walking in, and built their entire defense around stopping the one outcome everybody in the building had already silently agreed was coming. That's exactly what should have made this impossible. A live, fully committed double team from two defenders of that caliber is already close to unsolvable for the overwhelming majority of players who have ever stepped onto an NBA floor, in any era, at any age. A double team from two defenders of that caliber, against the man who'd had both of his heels surgically rebuilt less than a year earlier, shouldn't have been a contest at all. By every reasonable basketball rule, it should have been academic. Two defenses worth of size, speed, length, and youth thrown at one aging forward playing on time. Nobody was sure he still had. He caught the ball on the left wing with Jordan draped on him chest to chest, breathing the same air. One hard dribble, just enough to buy a sliver of daylight that shouldn't have existed. Pippen was already flying over from the help side by the time Bird squared up, meaning both of Chicago's best defenders were now fully in front of him at once, arms fully extended, no clean look anywhere on the floor that basic geometry should have allowed for. He rose into a fadeaway anyway, a high, arcing 13-foot shot, released from a spot where, by every normal rule of the sport, there simply shouldn't have been room for it. The ball hung in the air over both of their outstretched hands for what the broadcast crew called live, an agonizingly long half-second. 3.6 seconds left on the clock. It dropped through clean, no rim, no rattle, nothing but net. Boston 102, Chicago 100. Chicago still had those exact same 3.6 seconds to answer right back, and Jordan himself got the inbound immediately, with a clean look to tie the entire game from beyond the arc at the final horn. Kevin McHale came flying in from behind, seemingly out of nowhere as far as the television cameras were concerned, and blocked the attempt clean out of the air before it ever had the chance to leave a mark on the scoreboard. The horn sounded on a Boston win. The two best defenders in basketball walked off that final possession with absolutely nothing to show for the decision they'd made together, and the man they'd built their entire late-game defense around had answered it with a body that, 12 months earlier, wasn't even supposed to be capable of playing at this level again, let alone deciding a game with it. It wouldn't be the last time these two measured each other on a basketball floor, but it was one of the last nights Bird genuinely had the legs underneath him to answer Jordan like that. Within a couple of seasons, the back problems started for real. A compressed nerve, a long stretch of games missed, off-season surgery that never fully solved the underlying issue, no matter how many specialists looked at it. By 1992, in what everyone inside the building understood was Bird's final regular season meeting with the Bulls, Jordan reportedly walked over to him mid-game and told him, half joking and half not, that there was a new sheriff in town now. Bird didn't argue the point. He didn't have much left in his legs to argue it with anymore. Later that same year, when Bird officially walked away from the NBA for good, Jordan admitted publicly that he was almost relieved to see him go, joking to a room full of reporters that Bird had ruined a lot of my successful games against the Boston Celtics over the years. It was a joke with a real edge of truth buried underneath it, because for every point Jordan managed to score against him, for every individual record he broke chasing him down the court, the number that actually mattered on the nights that counted most had a stubborn habit of belonging to Bird, right up until his own body simply refused to let him do it one single time more.